Cleveland, 1935. A city caught in the grip of an economic downturn, struggling to find its footing amidst the chaos. The city was shrouded in darkness, both literally and metaphorically. The fog that rolled in each night seemed to mirror the uncertainty and fear that gripped the hearts of its residents. The Great Depression had sunk its teeth deep, leaving behind despair and desperation. Bread lines stretched for blocks, and hope was a rare commodity. But something far more sinister lurked in the shadows of Kingsbury Run. A killer, a monster. The fear of the unknown added to the already palpable tension in the air. A string of gruesome murders shocked the city, each crime scene more horrifying than the last, leaving the community in a state of perpetual dread. Bodies, or rather what remained of them, began to surface. The brutality of the acts was beyond comprehension, shaking even the most hardened detectives. Dismembered, drained of blood, often beheaded. The meticulous nature of the dismemberment suggested a methodical mind behind the madness. The victims, the forgotten, the marginalized souls lost in the depths of despair. They were the ones society had turned its back on, making them easy prey. Their identities, like their lives, were brutally erased. Each body that turned up was a grim reminder of the killer's reign of terror. The killer, a phantom, taunted authorities, leaving a trail of carnage but no trace of himself. The police were left chasing shadows, always one step behind. Who was this monster preying on the most vulnerable? The question haunted the city, as fear and paranoia spread like wildfire. This is the chilling story of the Cleveland torso murderer, a tale of fear, mystery, and the darkness that can consume even the most resilient of cities. A story that remains unsolved to this day. Prepare yourself. We are about to delve into a world of depravity, a world where the line between man and monster blurs. We will explore the darkest corners of the human psyche. What drives a person to commit such heinous acts? What darkness lies within us all? This is not for the faint of heart. Brace yourself for a journey into the macabre, where every shadow holds a secret, and every corner could conceal a nightmare. The Great Depression, a time of immense hardship and despair, where the very fabric of society seemed to unravel. Nowhere was this more evident than in Cleveland, Ohio, a city that bore the brunt of the economic collapse. The city, once a bustling hub of industry, was crippled by unemployment and poverty, its factories silent and streets empty. Thousands were homeless, seeking shelter in makeshift shantytowns dubbed Hoovervilles, where hope was a distant memory. These shantytowns were a grim testament to their plight, a stark reminder of the human cost of the economic downturn. Among these forgotten souls, a darkness festered, growing in the shadows of despair. The area known as Kingsbury Run, a desolate wasteland near the industrial heart of the city, became a symbol of the city's decline. It became a haven for society's outcasts, a place where the forgotten gathered. It was a place where hope dwindled and despair thrived, casting a long shadow over the city. It was here, in this breeding ground of misery, that the nightmare began. The authorities were overwhelmed, unable to cope with the rising tide of desperation. Poverty and crime were rampant, intertwining to create a volatile mix. The police were ill-equipped to handle the escalating crisis. Then the killings began, adding a new layer of terror to an already dire situation. The city, already on its knees, was about to face a new kind of horror, one that would leave an indelible mark on its history. They were the forgotten ones, the silent sufferers of an era marked by economic despair and social upheaval. The invisible souls swallowed by the abyss of the Great Depression, their stories untold and their struggles unnoticed. The victims of the torso murderer were, for the most part, never identified. Their lives, once vibrant, were reduced to mere footnotes in a grim chapter of history. Their pasts remained shrouded in mystery, their lives reduced to the horrific circumstances of their deaths. Each victim had a story, a family, a life that was abruptly and violently ended. Many were transients, drifting from one place to the next, seeking work and a glimmer of hope in a world consumed by despair. They moved through the shadows of society, unnoticed and unremembered. They were the forgotten casualties of a broken system, victims of both economic hardship and a ruthless killer, their names, their faces lost to time. The world moved on, but their stories remained untold, their identities forever obscured. Only the gruesome manner of their deaths remained, as a chilling testament to their existence. The brutality of their end was the only marker of their lives. The lack of identification hampered the investigation. Without names or backgrounds, the detectives were left with little to go on. It was as if the killer selected his victims knowing they would be difficult, if not impossible, to trace. This anonymity played into the hands of the murderer, making the task of solving the crimes even more daunting. They were the invisible victims of a heartless killer, their lives extinguished and their identities erased, leaving behind only questions and sorrow. Eliot Ness. The name resonated with an aura of righteousness, of unwavering justice. He was the man who brought down Al Capone, the scourge of Chicago. Ness was a symbol of hope in a time when corruption and lawlessness seemed to prevail. In 1935, Ness arrived in Cleveland, tasked with cleaning up the city's notorious police force, riddled with corruption and inefficiency. He had a reputation for being incorruptible, a beacon of hope in a city drowning in its own darkness. Little did he know that his greatest challenge awaited him in the shadows of Kingsbury Run. The torso murderer would test Ness's resolve, his skills, and his sanity. Section 5. Unveiling the horror, the butcher of Kingsbury Run. The discoveries began like whispers in the wind, rumors of body parts washing ashore the lake or found discarded in the marshlands of Kingsbury Run. Then the whispers turned into screams as the full horror of the murders unfolded. The victims, often dismembered, sometimes beheaded, bore the unmistakable marks of a sadistic and depraved mind. The killer, dubbed the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run by a terrified press, seemed to relish in the grotesque display of his handiwork. The bodies were often drained of blood, leading to speculation about the killer's possible profession. Was he a doctor? A butcher? Someone with anatomical knowledge? The lack of definitive answers only fueled the fear that gripped the city. Section 6. Panic grips the city, fear in the streets. As the body count rose, so did the panic in Cleveland. The citizens lived in terror, their once familiar city transformed into a landscape of fear. The newspapers, hungry for any scrap of information, published sensationalized accounts of the murders, further fueling the hysteria. Women were afraid to walk alone at night. Parents kept their children close, warning them of the boogeyman lurking in the shadows. The killer had instilled a pervasive sense of dread that permeated every aspect of life in Cleveland. The police, under immense pressure to catch the killer, conducted raids and rounded up suspects, but to no avail. The torso murderer remained elusive, a phantom preying on the vulnerable with impunity. Section 7. Ness's investigation, a race against time. Eliot Ness, faced with the most baffling and gruesome case of his career, threw himself into the investigation. He brought his trademark tenacity and determination to bear, but the torso murderer presented a unique challenge. There were no witnesses, no apparent motives, and the killer seemed to vanish into thin air after each gruesome act. Ness employed new forensic techniques, interviewed countless suspects, and even consulted with psychiatrists in an attempt to understand the killer's psyche. He led raids on the shantytowns of Kingsbury Run, hoping to flush out the killer. But the more Ness investigated, the more elusive the killer seemed to become. The case was a tangled web of dead ends and false leads. Section 8. Shadows of Suspicion, the elusive killer. The investigation into the torso murders was a frustrating journey into the darkest corners of the human psyche. Several suspects emerged, each with their own chilling story, but none could be definitively linked to the crimes. One name, however, stood out: Dr. Francis Sweeney. A former Army surgeon with a history of mental instability, Sweeney became a prime suspect. He even sent taunting postcards to Ness, claiming responsibility for the killings. Despite compelling circumstantial evidence, concrete proof remained elusive. Sweeney, who had connections to powerful figures in the city, was never charged and died in 1964, taking his secrets, if any, to the grave. Section 9. The mystery endures, unanswered questions. The torso murders remain unsolved to this day, a chilling reminder of the depravity that can lurk beneath the surface of society. The case continues to fascinate and horrify, inspiring books, documentaries, and countless theories. Who was the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run? Was it Dr. Francis Sweeney, or was he just a sadistic individual who enjoyed taunting the authorities? Or was the killer someone else entirely, someone who vanished without a trace, leaving behind a legacy of fear and unanswered questions? The passage of time has done little to dim the horror of the crimes or to provide definitive answers. The case remains an open wound on the psyche of Cleveland, a chilling reminder that some mysteries may never be solved. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and comment. Your support helps us bring more intriguing content to you.